First season of E-League in the books, entirely completed. The whole 10-week schedule or whatever it was with the bye week for ESL1 Cologne. Seems like an appropriate time to kind of do a retrospective and what I thought overall of the season. So in terms of starting at the top, one of the very ambitious things about this league is that they had something like, I think it was 24 teams, right? It was 6 groups of 4. I actually think that they had too many teams. And I think they know this. Like, for example, if you look at the timeline of how E-League was put together and the initial meetings they had, I think it was late 2015 or something, where there were those meetings, those pictures leaked of Turner offices by Complexity's owner, Jason Lake, and other people around this period of time. We heard talks that CLG head owner guy, TSM owner, these sorts of people were all they were all meeting Turner and they're all discussing this potential for a league. I think that suggests to me that they put the feelers out there for orgs and for names initially, and then what happened is, another detail is that you notice a number of the big teams didn't sign on until the very end, right before the league began. So I think another issue that happened was some of the other teams were holding out, trying to negotiate with other leagues and trying to figure out whether they'd play in A-League or whether they'd play something else, or whether there'd be some sort of exclusivity for certain teams in certain leagues. And so the issue here is, I feel like what happened is E-League got pressured into signing up teams on the basis that they wanted to have enough for the league, and then just have a couple that they would go with at the end. And in the end, all the big names came in, as in all the actual really good big name teams, and said, we want to be a part of it now. And so in the end, they had to expand it too much, and they ended up with this 24-team league. I think realistically, the amount of teams you should have had should have been probably at most 16. So you have 4 groups of 4, or something like 12, and then have people play more games against each other, something like this. Because I think that it was actually having too many teams in this sense that first and foremost made the tournament last perhaps too long. Because when you look back at it now and you look at the viewing figures, and you also consider how drawn out the nature of the tournament was, with the first 6 weeks of just group stage, that's the issue. First of all, I think it's hard to sustain interest over a 10-week span in any competition, in any sort of league. And I think, unfortunately, what made people feel like any of it was watered down was the fact that, it was in theory, because it had teams like Complexity, it had the NRGs of the world, it had TSM, who at the time hadn't proven themselves in any way on LAN. It had all these different teams in them who, probably weren't good enough to play in a league like this. And in a league of mine, where I'm suggesting 16 or 12 teams, wouldn't have been able to get into that elite company. And so having teams like that in the mix meant that, yeah, there were some games that were a bit lackluster, although some weeks where you were like, oh, I'm going to watch these two, I'm going to watch Fnatic face FaZe, but do I really care about Fnatic versus Complexity? Probably not. These sorts of things. Actually, Fnatic was in the TSM group, so that would be incorrect. It was, let me think, it was Envious and VP who were in the Complexity group. But you see what I mean? The point is, you're not going to care as much about those games. That's just because of the number of teams. That's not necessarily a format in itself. But with that said, I think it was always going to be hard to stretch it out over that amount of time. So as a result, when it felt watered down, I will say this, to be fair, it felt watered down because the tournament lasted longer. It didn't last longer ultimately in terms of how a tournament plays out, as in, if you go to the majors, you have 4 groups of 4, and then you come from those 4 groups of 4 into an 18 playoff. Sounds familiar, right? No, the reason this felt watered down is because at the majors, those 4 groups play out within something like 3 days, and the whole group stage is done at that point in time. So if, like me, you get a bit bored during group stages, or you don't care when the worst team in the group's playing the best team, you just skip that game, or you watch it and you go, oh, whatever, this will all be done in a day. The issue here was, because it was stretched over so many weeks, the first 6 weeks, so since there's a bye week, it's not 60%, but whatever, of 10 weeks, it was 60% of the whole broadcast was all this group stage going on. So that was the issue I felt like there, because that's what made it feel watered down, because their group stage lasted 6 weeks. Now, overall, I do think it was actually a good format. You have to realize the key detail about this league is that the reasons people were scared last year about exclusivity and stuff like this, and people thought it was going to be a battle between ESL Pro League and between E-League, it's because people thought it would be a league, as the name suggests. People thought it would be, you go to Atlanta and you have to go there for 10 weeks or whatever. Let's say the playoffs are the last 2 weeks. You go there for 8 weeks, and you have to literally live there, and week to week you're playing 2 to 3 games against all these different opponents and teams. Now listen, that would be cool in its own way, but obviously that would damage the tournament calendar for 2016 in a way that E-League didn't, because what was great about E-League was this group format where you played everyone in the group, but then that just determined the seedings for the group playoffs of those 4 teams who played who in the semi-finals, and then it was placing in the semi-finals. It was placing in the final or doing well in terms of maps that got you into the playoffs, the last chance qualifier. I think the format in its own was very good, as I'll get to in a second. But I think it was very good in terms of this overall league aspect because it made it simulate some league play because you had much more games than you have in just a straight up GSL group stage that goes out. You obviously only have, let me think, you only have, I think, 5 games in those. Whereas in this scenario, I mean, let's think about it. You had 12 group stage maps and then you had 6 to 9 maps in the playoffs. So you could get minimum 18 maps of play, and obviously you could have 21 maps of play in each group. So I think it simulated some of the groups, the league aspect, where you get to see lots of games. As a result, there's lots of exposure for the person running the league. But I also think the group format, allowing teams to just come in for their group and then the last chance qualifier and then the playoffs, also allowed the tournament itself to breathe, which ELEAGUE didn't have to do. They could have said, we've got all this money, play with us. So I think that's certainly an interesting concept. And I also think that it's quite good that, to me, I'm not as interested in league play. Like, I don't really care about, like, the 76ers playing in the NBA. I watched a lot of the NBA. I don't watch the 76ers games who are the worst team. Don't care about it. Don't even watch if a really great team plays them. Probably not going to be a good game. I might go back afterwards if I saw it was a great game on the box score. So in this scenario, I think league play in general is played out. I understand why it exists. It's because that is the fundament of how pro sports work. They want to fill people in an arena every week, and then they want to have something people to watch on TV in that area, and they want people to have opportunities to buy fan kits. You've got to have loads of games to do this, unfortunately. And then you want to have lots of exposure on television, lots of games to sell advertising space. And that's where the money and the eyeballs are coming from that get you the broadcast rights, which is what it's all about, right? So I understand that that's what they wanted. So to me, what they did is they found a tournament format, which is what they did, just a longer tournament format. And they kind of found like a happy compromise for now between real league play and a tournament play. Because really it was a tournament. It wasn't really a league if you look at the way it played out ultimately. I think in terms of the format as well, another thing to mention is that even the same format, if you just had only had good teams. So let's say instead of the 6 groups, we've got the 4 groups of 4, and we've only got the 16 best teams in the world. Now imagine how sick this format would suddenly seem to everyone every week. Because now every team in every group is going to be at least decent. I mean, when we're talking 16 best teams, that means the worst team in the group is going to be like a Flip Side. I mean, in the past, a Mouse Sports. These are all going to be decent teams. Cloud9. These are all going to be solid enough teams as the worst team. So now every game is going to have some level of interest and is going to be competitive in some nature. And you're going to get 12 good maps in the group stage play. And then you're going to get a minimum of 6 good maps in the playoffs of the group, if not 9 good maps. So like I said, you're going to get 18 good maps each group or 21 good maps that are worth watching. Wouldn't that be a great week to have? Now, teams... I mean, I've already told you the ones I'd probably remove, like Complexity, Echo Fox. To me, those were a waste of time. Even with the odd upset that each of them was managed to pull off, they never were going to make it deep. They never could have made the final of their group. So it was irrelevant to watch them play as far as I was concerned. And they were never going to be any sort of threat for any kind of last chance qualifier or anything. So I never thought it mattered. So in that scenario, where every team's good, imagine then even the last chance qualifier thing of not the teams that finish second are going automatically, but those teams that are competing for those last 2 slots for the last chance qualifier. Think how awesome that's going to be, where you know there's all these really good teams, and then you see the record one team sets 1 week before, and now even if you know you can't make the final of your group, you've got such good teams there, or you don't, you're at least still scrapping for every map to try and get that last chance qualifier, and that'd be super competitive, as it was ultimately, but would have been even more so because you wouldn't have had some teams who got no maps, etc. In general, it wouldn't have been as likely if you had a much more competitive group scenario. Now, I actually do think the last chance qualifier concept was very, very good. I thought this was a great addition to the tournament. Being as we don't have double elimination, and we don't have this error checking aspect to a thing where your seedings don't have to be as great because this is another way to qualify to show you the best. I think last chance qualifier was quite kind of like a solid way to almost have a double elimination concept because it provided 3 ways to qualify. You could win your group outright. Obviously, that goes to the playoffs anyway. We know that traditionally. You could come second in your group, but instead of going to the playoffs, you went to the last chance qualifier where you have to prove yourself again, but you're still alive in the tournament. And then even if you didn't win your group or come second, you could be one of the top 2 teams of everyone else in terms of points scored by map wins, and you could make it to last chance qualifier. And then from the last chance qualifier, which is just a playoff bracket, 2 teams qualified to the last 2 slots in the playoffs, because obviously the 6 groups, therefore the 6 winners go into the first 6 slots, and then there's 2 more slots that you bring in from the last chance qualifier. And there you go, you've got your 8 teams to the playoffs. I think that's sick because to me, if you couldn't qualify through those three ways, win the group, come second, and go through the last chance qualifier, make it the last chance qualifier, get it through by being on the top two otherwise, you simply weren't good enough. So there was no one who didn't make it into the last chance qualifier who I look at and go, oh, but they were so good and just that bad group and everything. No, I look at it and I go, no, you simply weren't good enough. This format actually kind of proved itself out. What a great format overall. And it's a way to have some sort of group play, but then with this extra feature, but then not to have double elimination, because admittedly for television, in terms of time constraints, double elimination would be a lot more difficult to run. In terms of another issue I want to bring up is the detail of... Actually, maybe I'll put that towards the end. So let's talk about some of the actual matches now, because that's obviously a key detail of the season, is what were the fucking matches, what were the teams like who played there. One of the big problems I thought in this season is that one aspect we could never have known would really impact the league, and people haven't really thought about this as much, it feels like they've just kind of been on a downer because of what happened at the major, is that since G2 finished last at the major, admittedly in the group of death, it feels like people have like cooled off on them, like, yeah, they had their run, they were really good. I mean, G2 with their full lineup, we still haven't seen them look anything except good. They were very legit against SK on Cobble, which is turning out to be a very good map for SK now. They absolutely almost beat Fnatic in that train game. They're still an extremely good team who had that unfortunate mega group of death. So for me, I want to see that main lineup of G2 play because I know they can be a contender, especially since they have this winning record in maps against the guys from SK. So I really want to see those guys competing still and see how long they can keep this going for, or if they can remain a top-level team, because we know they're a threat. And they obviously had some of the hottest players in the world in Shocks and Scream at some of those tournaments. So what was unfortunate is that key game where they got to the final of the group and they'd already beaten NiP before, and you thought to yourself, right, well, what's going to happen now is they beat NiP, they go through in first place to the playoffs, but they lost to NiP. Now, that turned out to be like NiP was performing very well at the time. It looked like G2 had an underperformance of some of their players, and you were like, oh, well, no problem. They go into the last chance qualifier. They're clearly one of the best teams in the last chance qualifier, so it won't be an issue. But since they couldn't use RPK for the last chance qualifier, coming back from the major, they were in this situation where they went out in super narrow fashion anyway, with a fucking complete stand-in who wasn't played at the top level, to the Mouse Sports guys, where Nico had to hard carry Mouse Sports. So they almost went through regardless. And you have to realise, if you look at the track of where their route through the last chance qualifier into the playoffs would have gone, they would have, if they'd beaten Mouse Sports with the real lineup, they would have played FaZe. Very winnable series right there. They've beating FaZe gets you into the playoffs, and in the playoffs they would have had the first round opponent against Astralis, who we saw collapse against Mouse, so that means they could have played Virtus.pro in the semi-finals. So the route was wide open for us to have an even more competitive semi-finals. Sure, it was cool that Mouse Sports made it there, and Nico went God mode to get them to that point in time, but they were never going to beat Virtus.pro, it felt like, and they were never going to make the final, and they could have never won the tournament, whereas who knows with G2, and who knows if G2 could have made the final. I mean, that would have been sexy as fuck, right? G2 makes the final, and we get a rematch with them versus Fnatic of that semi-final of ECS, where actually G2 just dominated Fnatic in shocking fashion. So that would have been great in itself. Also, who wouldn't have wanted to see them versus Virtus.pro, who's in sick form? I mean, what's Virtus.pro going to leave up then? If they ban out Dust 2, then the guys from G2 could pick a Cash or something like that. I think that would have been a hell of a match. Key thing is, we haven't seen Virtus.pro be a big best of 3 against this G2 when it's been in this level of form, because VP didn't qualify for those two big tournaments where they had their runs. EPL was an online tournament VP didn't qualify for. Obviously, they got relegated from ESL Pro League. And then ECS, they also didn't qualify for. So in this scenario, I think it's a real shame, unfortunately, because of the injury to RPK that we didn't get to see, and losing that group match, and we never got to see the real G2 go through the playoffs. I mean, obviously not through any fault of ELEAGUEs. Obviously, the lack of SK was a big shame. I mean, they're clearly the best team in the world. They were the 2 damn major champions. They won the major during ELEAGUE because the bye week was, like, obviously taking place at that point. And yeah, they were clearly the best team, so they would have been the favourite to win this tournament. And also, I think just in terms of their legacy, it's a shame, because if they could have won ELEAGUE, then since this is smack bang in the middle of their era, this would be a chance to add another 250k or more tournament to their haul. I mean, they've obviously got the 2 majors already, and they've got EPL, but they didn't win ECS, and so the DreamHack Custom was smaller, and they didn't win Malmo. So this would be a chance to add another one, because who knows when the major is or what's going to happen with the major towards the end of this year. And now you've got the first scenario, so this would have been a chance smack bang within their era to see how they would have done in this kind of a format, and how they would have done against people like a Fnatic or a VP on American soil on a big stage. That would have been interesting to see. I do think the rule issue of their ineligibility of their players, to me, actually highlighted a problem in our scene, not in ELEAGUE. Like, their rules were actually very fair, as I've made a previous video about it. Maybe I'll put up there, called ELEAGUE and SK. The big issue to me was that we had organisers in this scene who wanted to play in this huge televised league without having their players contracted through the entire time the league ran. I would personally make that some sort of a rule. I mean, I would have that as a rule to even be allowed to enter, and therefore force the teams to do it. But teams should have done that anyway. It was kind of silly to think that you could just run out halfway through and then switch org when you're running this televised thing with narratives. Anyway, I go into all that in that video. So I don't think it's ELEAGUE's problem that it went like that. It's just unfortunate because this happened, it did kind of remove the number one team from the tournament. And so to me, the way I reframed it is, okay, it's not like the tournament doesn't matter anymore. Anyone who suggested that is probably like a butthurt SK fan / Brazilian fan. Because obviously this tournament mattered. This tournament had the other best teams in the world in it. It's ridiculous to suggest that just because the best team isn't there, the tournament doesn't matter. There have been many teams in history that didn't have NIP, that didn't have... let me think, who else should we pick? Fnatic, obviously, in 2014, 2015. You know, Envious won a bunch of tournaments they didn't have Fnatic in, but it was still sick tournaments. Starladder Season 12 is a good example, I think, where it was a fucking awesome tournament with all the rest of the best teams, but no Fnatic. And Envious won that beating NIP. So I think it's ridiculous, just it didn't matter. But the way to reframe it in my mind was, okay, we're not going to get to see the best team. Since we're going to get to see the rest, though, this for me now becomes a contenders match. Whoever wins this one is who we're going to set up to go against SK next. So if Fnatic wins it, we're going to be like, right, Fnatic, they're in form now. Olofmeister's back. They're looking dangerous again. Now let's put them against SK in a best of 3 with Olofmeister fully flowing again. Let's see that matchup that we haven't really seen yet. Because obviously Fnatic hasn't gotten to face them yet. If Virtus.pro manages to win it, as they obviously did, cool. We know they match up great from the majors already. Let's see them go against the guys from SK now. Full confidence behind them. Fully rolling with this great sick run they went on. Na'Vi, obviously, if they could have made it, but obviously they've fallen apart now. If they'd have bounced back, we always knew they matched up well against SK in the past. This would be great if they can obviously beat Fnatic and VP or someone to win this tournament, and we know they're in sick form. Whoever won, it was going to be a good contenders match to go against SK next time. That's kind of how I thought about it. Now, in terms of Fnatic at this tournament, they actually looked like, because they got Olofmeister back, they looked like they were getting strong right up until that final. I mean, they were getting stronger and stronger. They looked good even at the major. When they lost there, remember, it was close fashion. I think they lost like 16-13 on both the maps. Admittedly, their best maps to Team Liquid. But Team Liquid was a good team on Cobble. No one really knew what they were like on Cash. And so we also know it was this godlike performance from Simple that got Team Liquid over the hump there. So I thought Fnatic was good at the major and certainly could have played in the final there. So they looked really strong here, and crucially, they looked strong on individual play. Like, I have a lot of criticisms about their style at the moment. Maybe I'll make a video about that one day. But I thought they looked very strong individually, and they were now flowing again. They had that confidence. On a maps like Cash, you were scared to play them if they got into that CT side. You knew on T side of Cobble they would run Rampage over anyone. They were even getting wins on maps like Train. They were starting to get scary again. This was starting to get a team that intimidate people, as we saw when they fucking dominated Na'Vi, who is a very good team still. Or was. Now, I do think in the final, they got baited into a cocky pick ban because they went with that pick of Cobble, which VP had won something like 7 in a row coming into that match, and had just beaten SK and showed they were one of the best in the world on Cobble. Obviously, they could have just gone with the Cash pick at this point in time, because Virtus.pro banned out Dust 2. So I think they should have gone with the Cash pick. I think that would have been a very good chance to win the first map, and since VP hadn't lost a map from the last chance qualifier onwards, it would be a good way to kind of like put the thought in their mind that like, oh, you can be intimidated, you can be beaten. I think that Fnatic went with the cocky route, thinking, well, we're better on Cobble anyway, we're the best team on Cobble, maybe, and therefore thinking, then when we beat them on Cobble, we'll really stick it to them, and then you know what, fuck it, when we play them on their other maps, we'll beat them there too, and this will be like, we'll win the game mentally as well as with skill, but not with overall style and being the best on those maps. Now, if that had worked, that was cool. That would have been the most baller anime level storyline ever. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and they got beaten 2-0 as a result. So I think that cockiness and the fact that they had to try and do that intimidation style, that's one of the things about this Fnatic that is lacking from the old Fnatic. The Pronox Fnatic, I think, would have been much more intelligent and much more frugal with their map pick and their vetoes, and done a better job in terms of what to do here, and also wouldn't have banned out a nuke type scenario, because even if VP say they would have picked nuke, I think that would have been a mistake on VP's side. So you bait VP into the nuke pick, if anything. I think in this world, you got to be more smart about how you do it, whereas they were just going for comfort and thinking we'll beat them because we're better players. I think that's the right approach. But at the same time, it's still good to see that Fnatic's skills are back and that they're so dangerous still, and they are becoming the intimidators again. Admittedly, Olofmeister not at a superstar level at the moment. Now, Virtus.pro coming through to win was not just a big deal in itself, because the deal to me that was key was that they won another 250k or more tournament. These guys have now won a 250k or more tournament for 3 years in a row now. And that's a big deal because, by the way, Na'Vi, Astralis, those teams have been incredible teams that have won massive tournaments. They've never won a 250k or more tournament, like a big one or a major. You look at these guys, VP, they've won one every year. So they managed to bounce back, and they do it with this incredible style where we say, yeah, like they said in that interview that Neil said, they don't change players, they change roles. And somehow they do manage to use that restriction, the creative restriction, to figure out a way with what resources they have, depending on who's playing how well, who can AWP. Now Snacks is the secondary AWP, is the main AWP now. Oh, now we're switching Neo to the in-game leader. Whatever they have to switch up, they work with it. And listen, they're probably never going to be the best team. That's probably never going to happen for them. But they're able to make it work, and they're able to be good as a result of it, and to consistently compete and get back to a very high level and always give people a war, because they are mentally tough and they grind and they don't give up. Part of that might be experience, might just be having a lot of heart, which they clearly do. So obviously they're a fantastic team to watch. I've always understood why they had a lot of fans around the world, and it's not just that like thing of like, haha, yeah, a lot of Polish people have moved around Europe. No, it's obviously because they're one of the most exciting, entertaining teams of all time to watch, and they have so much heart when they play and how they match up with people who can't help but enjoy watching them and be like, oh fuck, I hope they really make this a really great sick game. And obviously the way they play when they get into the plow mode is so infectious. It's so excitatory in its nature when you watch it, that it's so enjoyable to watch, and you want to see them go against those best teams and see who can stop the plow when it gets rolling. I also think something clearly did change in them at the major onwards, because at the major they really kicked into that gear where if they'd have done a more intelligent pick and not picked Nuke, if they'd have picked your train or something like that, I think they would have had a chance to beat SK. I still think SK would have won, but they would have had a legit chance at it, especially after stealing that cobblestone. So you saw them after that when they got back to America. Last chance qualifier, they just 4-0 it. They go through the playoffs, they just beat NIP 2-0, including winning on Dust 2, which is Nip's map. That's a massive statement. Then they beat out Mouse easily 2-0. Then they get to the final. They even beat Fnatic 2-0. So they just went absolutely ham. I mean, what's that, like 10 maps or something in a row? I think it's 10 maps in a row. They just went 10-0. Super sick stuff. Very impressive. And obviously, that's also, though, to be fair, why it was hard to predict the final. Because to be fair, you look at some of the competition they played, it wasn't as sick. Like, for example, in the last chance qualifier, they played Renegades instead of Flipside. Flipside, obviously, it looks hot coming from the major. Renegades, we don't know much about them. Traditionally, VP guys have always beaten them up as well. That seemed too easy for them. Then they played against NIP. Now, NIP's coming off the major where they'd gotten shocked by Flipside. And then NIP looked super terrible, didn't do well, had a big name, obviously. Then they play Mouse Sports. Mouse Sports, in theory, shouldn't even have been there. It could have been a G2, could have been an Astralis. But Mouse Sports gets there. Nico doesn't even play God Mode, and that's the one thing that had gotten them there. Therefore, they managed to win easily. So coming into the final, it was hard to predict that they were actually going to win. You still had to feel like Fnatic had to do it. Fnatic historically always had a great record against VP. But they managed to do it in spite of all that, and it was obviously a fantastic storyline. I think Na'Vi was very underwhelming at this tournament. You saw in the playoffs, the first round against C9, there was some issues there. That wasn't a team. Na'Vi normally would crush in that scenario. They wouldn't just edge past to C9 like that. I mean, that's a series where they get Overpass and Cobble. They're supposed to body those maps, especially Overpass, but particularly Cobble as well. Those are two maps that, like, classic Na'Vi of like 3 or 4 months ago just wrecks those maps, and a team like C9 would have had no chance, and it would have been a 2-1, and it would have been a convincing 2-1 at that. Then you got to look at the fact that Astralis and Nip just really fell apart and looked like a mess in terms of style. Astralis had their real lineup and inexplicably were terrible against Mouse. Didn't get anything except Device having a decent buff performance. NIP, just a total wreck right now. I mean, they were really whack in this tournament, not even being able to win Dust 2 against the guys from VP when they had a chance to pick it. That really shows me something's wrong there. They've got a problem right now where the style no longer fits the personnel. The personnel's obviously the form of players changes, and they haven't done a VP and changed up what they're doing. They're sticking with this approach that they've been taking earlier in the year. It's just not working anymore. So in terms of the tournament, now, first of all, as this tournament, obviously it isn't a major because Valve are the only ones who get to call theirs majors. But I think it has the status of almost equivalent to a major. In the same way as for me, tournaments like ESL Invitational Dubai or ESL Pro League also have like similar status of like very sick tournaments, good formats, strong teams there, good prize money, good prestige. In that sense, I think ELEAGUE succeeded and it was one of the big tournaments of the year. Now, the lack of SK obviously made it not as sick in terms of having the best team there, so SK could have won or been beaten in incredible fashion. So yeah, that's a shame, but it's not their fault. Obviously, they can't be blamed for that. So I think it was a good first season. I want to just say, in terms of one issue, is that I actually feel like one area where ELEAGUE fucked themselves a little bit is if you notice, their prize money, except for the majors, was the highest. It was like, what? In the end, because of like that team because of the disqualifications. I think the prize money ended up as like 390k for first or 400k for first. That's huge money. That's like almost 4 times what you used to get for winning a major in 2015. So that's massive money. The problem ELEAGUE had was, if you remember, when they announced it, it was like $1.4 million for the season or something. Well, the problem is, if you remember, ECS announced theirs. Oh, we have 3.5 million. Now, if you actually go and look how much prize money there was at the offline... In fact, I'll do it now, just so I can show you the exact figure and how scummy this is. So, let's have a look. So ECS said 3.5 million for theirs, right? But then when you find out how much the prize pool is for the LAN final, you're going to be shocked. I don't think a lot of people picked up on this. So the prize purse for the LAN final was $765,000, yet they said 3.5 million. You know why? Because that covered all travel expenses and stuff like that. Now, ELEAGUE doesn't cover that. They don't count that as part of theirs. If they'd counted that, God only knows how much theirs could have been. Flying teams to Atlanta for a week, putting them up in an expensive hotel, having them come to a TV studio. Hell, by their logic, maybe FACEIT could even charge it. Oh, well, we can charge in the studio time. Who knows what happened there? But ELEAGUE was easily the biggest money tournament this year. They had more money put into it than any major. Remember, a major is $1 million. So I just want to point that out when people think about this tournament. And unfortunately, the fact that ECS has kind of pipped them on at biggest prize pool, because they didn't. That wasn't a prize pool. How can it be counted as a prize pool to have the fucking last place team at the finals flown to the event? How is that a prize pool? How am I playing for any part of this prize here? No one is. That's ridiculous. So I think that's kind of bullshit. But whatever. It was a huge tournament, to my point. Some of the issues were related to television. You've got to be realistic. Like, first of all, time limit means they can't just have super long matches. If matches go super long, the ratings actually dip. This is something a lot of people don't understand. If it goes to 3 maps in one of those matches, those ones that were on television, then the rating will automatically be lower because you kick over into another time slot and then the ratings are like averaged over it or something. I'm not sure how it works. I don't know about how television works, but that's how it was explained to me. So actually it was better, believe it or not, to have quick 2 zeros in terms of the rating numbers. So that's obviously not great for Counter-Strike because we want to see great 3-map series, like an epic war, like think of classic matches of like SK versus TSM. Now Astralis in the past, it was always 3 maps. It was always super great. That's what we want to see. As a result, time limit can also affect you because now you can't have a best of 5 final. You're trying to fit into a time slot and be on there every week and fill up a certain amount of space. And the way they're trying to do it creatively is you want it to be shorter. And then if you have to fill space, do it with an analysis desk. If the game's super long, you get next to no analysis desk. You see some of the problems here with being on television, but that's the world you're in. You have no choice about this. And likewise, when people talked about broadcast over Twitch meant that you couldn't see the analyst desks and replays and stuff. Remember, there's a good reason why they can't put the TV feed on there. Because they've signed contracts with people on their TV network to advertise with them to be shown at certain times of the day on their television broadcast. So if they put all the features that would make you watch the television broadcast if you're in America online, then what's going to happen is people are just going to watch on Twitch instead and therefore not see some of those television ads. Therefore, the company that is funding the whole league, and the only reason this league can exist, won't have the money and won't have the contracts in place to fund the league. So that's not an option. That is not in any way an option. Sure, it'd be great if all these other places around the world could somehow figure out partnership deals with TV channels, some other system. I don't know what it would be right now. A pay online method. I don't know what it would be, but it sounds complicated. And unfortunately for right now, that wasn't an option. You have to remember, they are a TV channel. This was a television show. The fact it's a tournament, unfortunately, had to be secondary in that respect. They're not a tournament organizer where the only person they're trying to appeal to is you, the viewer. These people are beholden to their sponsors and to the TV channel. We aren't funding ELEAGUE in that sense. We watch it, and that's a key part of it, sure, but it was funded on the most direct level in a different manner in that sense. We're not ultimately the person they were working for. So I think there were a lot of issues there, and I don't know how you overcome them. But again, the option isn't change all that and just put it for free on Twitch and then have everyone watch there, because then it wouldn't exist. They wouldn't be able to fund it. It would end tomorrow. So basically your only option is have it like this or a slightly tweaked version of this, or don't have it exist at all. And if you say, oh, well, I'll have it not exist at all, get the fuck out. You shouldn't even be involved in this discussion then. That's not a reasonable option, is it, to take? Obviously, in this scenario, I'd rather have a tournament than no tournament. I mean, I don't think that's even really a debate. So overall, I thought it was a pretty good season. I thought some things weren't as ideal. Like, for example, oftentimes we were quite limited on the analysis desk on the TV show broadcast because you got limited time there. We didn't have as much time. Hopefully for Season 2, they can expand this. We can have some more time to discuss things. We can have time to go over things. Obviously, we never even approached a world where you could have like a Yanko's Weatherman segment, could we? Because we were very short comments sometimes. They were telling us, right, go now, to go to the game. So overall, I thought it was a very good season. I was actually impressed by the way things were run. It was very professional. I even thought they had a lot of balls to stick with that rule decision. Just because it's the best team, they didn't just cave and let SK play, despite the fact it was a rule violation. They actually stuck with it, which actually took a lot of balls and actually showed a level of integrity, I thought. So I thought it was a very good season overall. I thought the storylines were great. This was a great challengers match. I want to see VP against SK so badly in a big final or a big semi-final soon. I think that is the most exciting matchup in the world right now. I want to see if G2 bounces back. I want to see what Fnatic does with this super sick lineup, but will they change players? Na'Vi, obviously this spurred them to make the move with Simple. I think it was a great first season with some problems, but understandable.